Welcome back to Adaptive Humans. I'm your host, Jami. Around here, we return to three anchors: how we navigate our emotions, how we adapt across differences, and how we steady ourselves when stress or triggers show up. Because that's what helps us stay human when life gets real. This is episode 8 of season 2, the finale. I want to take a moment before we go anywhere else to acknowledge what this season has actually been. We started in early 2026 with an invitation to begin again, to recalibrate, to find your footing on ground that had been shifting for a while, quite some time maybe even, before you were ready to name it. That first episode was about the courage it takes to restart, not because everything's resolved, but because you decide to move anyway. From there, we named the invisible load, the things you carry that don't show up on the calendar, don't get a line item in the budget, and don't get acknowledged in the meeting, but shape every single decision you make. We said plainly, this is not a talent gap, it's a capacity gap. And those two things require completely different responses. Then we named decision debt. This was an episode I heard from a number of you about. What accumulates when the load is so consistently high that decisions stop being made and start stacking up. The cost of what you haven't decided yet, and how the cost compounds quietly while everyone acts like everything's fine. And then Daisha Heck joined us to talk about what happens when the body itself becomes the constraint, what it means to advocate for yourself when the system isn't designed to make that easy. Then we talked about functional masking, the sophisticated, practiced, often invisible skill of performing fine. The question the episode asked was whether you know you're doing it, because awareness is where the work begins. And then we had Ritu Basin, and her and I talked about what it cost to carry the weight of caregiving and the nuances of cultural expectations and traditions around long-term and chronic illness care, what ambiguous loss feels like, and what it means to finally come home to yourself after years of caring for others. And in episode 7, I got personal and talked about navigating accumulative grief, compounding change, and what it looks like to practice what I teach. From the inside of the season that had me living out alongside what so many of you are navigating. With a newer twist for me, finding ways to be kinder to myself in the midst of what life is asking of me and of so many of us. That's the season we built. Not a tidy arc with a clean conclusion, but a real one. The kind that looks like the actual human experience. It's nonlinear, it's heavy in places, lighter in others, and still unfinished in the ways that matter most. So this episode is a place to land before we carry what we've learned into whatever comes next. Beyond the bio. Beyond the bio is where we go past the curated surface, not the version that lives on a profile or a website. When I designed this season, I had a plan. I did have a clear arc, a full episode map, guests I was excited about, and a production timeline that made sense. And then life did what life does. And I've spent the entire season teaching about invisible load and capacity gaps and decision debt and functional masking while living all of it in real time. As my actual daily experience, week after week, episode after episode. There's something both clarifying and humbling about that. You can know a framework deeply, teach it clearly, believe it completely, and still find yourself inside it without warning. The framework doesn't protect you from the experience. It just gives you language for it while you're in it. What I have learned this season, slowly, imperfectly, and not for the first time, and I suspect maybe for not for the last, is that self-compassion is not a feeling. It's not something that arrives naturally when you're under pressure. Self-compassion is a practice. And like any practice, it requires deliberate structure. You have to architect it. And then you have to protect it, especially on the weeks when everything in the culture and the life around you is pushing you and pushing back against it. I made intentional choices this season about what I could hold and what I could not hold. Some of those choices were visible, most were not. Each one required me to do something that does not come easily, to extend to myself the same generosity that I extend to everyone else. And that is harder than it sounds, particularly for those of us who learned early on that being useful meant being the one who holds everything, who absorbed early in life that love and belonging were the things you earned by showing up fully for others, often before yourself. Old patterns don't disappear because you know better. They wait. They come back, especially under pressure, especially when the load is high and the margin is thin. The only thing that changes them over time is practice. Repeated, imperfect, sometimes stubborn practice that you choose to return to even when you have stumbled away from it. And I'm still in the middle of it. And I think many of you are too. And we just have to know that it's not a problem to solve before this season ends. That's the work. And being in it without treating not being done as a failure, in and of itself is a practice. Brave enough moment. The brave enough moment is the action you take before you can see the whole horizon. It is the move you make in the middle of uncertainty without a guarantee of what comes next. This episode, is for a specific person. This is the person who has been doing the most invisible work this season and is still here. It is not about having it all figured out or everything neat and tidy in your life. It's the one who listened to the episodes about invisible load while carrying their own that no one around them could see. Who heard the conversation about decision debt and recognized in it that they had decisions that they made last week or that they didn't make and that are stacking up. It's for the one who sat with the functional masking episode and thought, that's me. I do that. I've been doing that for years. The one who's been holding space for everyone around them, at work, at home, in their communities, while also trying to figure out how to hold a little bit of space for themselves. And I want to name something directly. That invisible work is not equally distributed. Some people have been carrying more of it for longer, with less margin, and with more scrutiny, and with fewer systems designed to acknowledge it. Equity is not built into many of our social structures. So no, it is not a personal failing, but about your best in the midst of a structural reality that you live in. And one of the things this season has been trying to do is name those structures clearly enough that we stop internalizing their weight as something wrong with us. Here is what I want to give before we close this season. At the start of season 2, you may not have had the words for what you were carrying. And now, I hope you do. You know what invisible load is, not just a concept, but as a real and specific thing that shapes your decisions and your capacity, whether or not anyone around you can see it. You know what a capacity gap is, and you know it is not the same as a talent gap, no matter how many times the story gets told about you and your team. You know what decision debt is, the accumulation that happens when too many things go unnamed and unresolved for too long, and what it costs the people and the systems that keep absorbing it. You know what functional masking is, what it costs over time, and what it means that you were already doing it long before anyone gave it a name. You know what ambiguous loss feels like, or at least you heard us talk about what ambiguous loss might feel like. The grief that doesn't come with a formal name or a bereavement policy, but takes up real space in your body and in your life regardless of it. You know what forced recalibration is, and maybe, like me, you lived one out this season. Those words matter more than they might seem. Naming what we carry is not just reflection. Research on affect labeling, the practice of putting language to an emotional experience, shows it actually reduces the threat response in our brains. So your prefrontal cortex comes back online and you move from reactivity toward choice. Naming is the first act of regulation. So here's the brave enough moment for this season. Staying in it without treating not being done as evidence that you are behind. You are not behind. You are in it. And I want to say something about what that actually looks like, because it rarely looks like what we imagine. It does not look like this big breakthrough moment or some dramatic shift. Most of the time, staying in it looks like an ordinary Tuesday. It looks like noticing you're running on low and choosing to eat something before the next meeting instead of just pushing through. It looks like pausing before you respond to something that activated you or you had a stress response around, even when every instinct says to react immediately. It looks like saying no to one thing so that you can actually have the capacity to the three other things that matter more. It looks like going to bed instead of scrolling for another hour because that scrolling is going to impact your sleep and your start of your day tomorrow. None of that is glamorous. None of it makes the highlight reel. But that is where adaptability actually lives. Not in the big moments of resilience, in the small, repeated choices you make to stay in your own life with some degree of intention. That is the practice. And you have been practicing it this whole season, whether you realized it or not. Just Be Reset. The Just Be Reset is where we take a moment to pause and practice the self-compassion we know our minds and bodies need. We're going to close this season in 3 parts. The first is a breath practice. Take a moment to do this with me if you're able. Find a comfortable position. If you're driving, you can soften your grip a little on the steering wheel. If you're walking, let your pace slow just slightly. And if you're sitting somewhere, let your shoulders drop from your ears and sink into your seat. We're going to do an extended exhale after a shorter breath. This breath pattern activates what they call the vagus nerve and sends a signal to your nervous system that you are not in danger. It is one of the fastest and most accessible ways to move from a stress response back into regulation. So you don't need equipment or a fancy app. It's just your breath. So we're going to inhale through the nose for the count of 4, and then we'll exhale slowly, and you can do it for a count of 6 to 8, anywhere in there. And I want you to do it as it feels natural or comfortable for you. So let's try that together. Inhale for 2, and exhale now for 6. So you want to inhale 2, 3, 4. Exhale for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good. You can stay with that breath if you like for a minute and continue to repeat that in for 4, out for 6 or 8 while we continue with the episode. The second part of this is a question, and I'm not looking for you to answer it right now. I want you to carry it with you, maybe for today, this week, or in whatever is coming next for you. So here's the question. What did you carry this season that you couldn't name at the start of 2026? You don't have to share it. You don't have to resolve it right now. Just let yourself know what it is. Because somewhere in you, you already know what you've been carrying since the start of the year. And naming it, even quietly, just to yourself, is the beginning of something. And that's where the regulation starts. That's where the capacity begins to return and even begin again if you have to. The third part is something we do at the close of every episode that I want to do slightly different today. You often hear me say, we could call it a mantra at the end of every episode. And today, if you're able, I'd love for you to say it out loud with me. Or if you need to, under your breath, or however it works best for you. But if you're able, join me. Even if this is something you don't feel right now, because sometimes you have to say it before you feel it. Sometimes the saying it is what makes feeling it possible. And that's how it works. That is why we keep coming back to it. So here we go together. I am brave. I am enough. I am brave enough. And so are you. Thank you again for being with me this season. And I want to say something to the person who showed up for this season of Adaptive Humans. You keep coming back, episode after episode, while carrying whatever your version of this season has been. Even when the timing wasn't perfect, even if you did not have everything figured out, you keep showing up. You did not have to be okay to be here. You did not have to have it all together. You just had to show up. And you did. I look forward to what season 3 will bring. Until then, take good care of yourself. The real kind of care. Surround yourself with those who support the way you care for yourself, not the performative version you can deliver. This is Adaptive Humans. Real talk, intentional growth.